Hey there, we are live with the live stream sewing class this evening, and we are going to make a boxy top. I'm just gonna see, oh, hey there. So you're gonna hear a bunch of, oops. Hey there, we are live with the live stream sewing class this evening, and we are going to make, okay, sorry, having some sound difficulties. I thought I was muted, but I don't think I am muted. I think you all can hear me. If you can't hear me or anything's really seeming kind of strange, let me know in the chat. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Catherine. We are going to make this top. It's the free download from Peppermint Magazine. It's the Harvest top from Pattern Runway. They call it the Boxy top on Peppermint Magazine, and we are going to get started cutting this out. So normally in my sewing classes, the Me Made workshops that I do, you come to the class cut out. But for tonight, I do want to demonstrate cutting out the fabric because I think it's an important thing to learn if you're a beginner. I'll do it quick. I have everything all pinned. So here we have the fabric. So I followed almost the exact layout that they showed in the pattern. It's on this page here. I have 45-inch wide fabric, so I literally just followed this. There's one thing I did different, and I saved a tiny bit of fabric. I'll show you what I mean. So starting up here, I'm just gonna cut. And I think I'm going to use scissors tonight because I can do it faster, believe it or not, with scissors. Maybe I'll cut some of these little pieces out with my rotary cutter. But by no means does everything have to be perfect. I'm cutting the size 44 because I checked on the instructions, and that is the size that closest matches my measurements. So that's the line that I'm using on the pattern. And now I'm just quickly cutting them out. So we've got the back facing here. It's kind of a weird looking piece. This piece in particular says that we need to cut fusible interfacing. I'm skipping the interfacing on this. This is a quilter's cotton top. It doesn't need to have that much structure in it, I don't think, so that is why I'm skipping it. So, there we go. This is the front top. That is cut on the fold, so when I take this off the pattern, it's one big piece, right? It's on the fold. I'm just gonna keep it attached so I know what it is. Same goes for this one. Cut on the fold, signified by this arrow. And then, out of the way. This one is also cut on the fold. Now, I'm going to talk about this sleeve band and why it's on here kind of diagonally. You'll see the arrows are going left to right, up and down. So I've lined those up with the horizontal and vertical grain of the fabric. You're cutting it like this because it's the sleeve band, and it needs to go around armhole. And so when you cut it on the bias like this or diagonally, it allows you to go in a circle a little bit easier. It doesn't get all wrinkled and folded. It kind of just goes around the armhole a bit nicer. It uses up more fabric, unfortunately, but I think it's worth it. And here's the front facing. This one's on the fold. Keep everything attached so you know what it is when we go to sew it. And then these pieces do not need to be on the fold. However, I kind of decided to do this one on the fold. Actually, I can probably move it up. And what it is the back hemband. It's a rectangle, so I folded it in half. It's perfectly symmetrical, and I'm placing it on the fold because then I can cut one here, and then I can cut a second one because we need two of them. And I can cut my second one right below it. And that's just a trick that I use to save some fabric. So there we go. Cut my second one. And then you'll see I'll have two pieces the size that it's supposed to be for the back hemband. Oh, Monty decided to make an appearance. All right. Here's my back top. Now, the reason this is not on the fold is because the back is buttoned. So this can be two separate pieces cut apart, one for the left side, one for the right side. And let's see. And this is the center back panel. Again, doesn't need to be on the fold, two separate pieces. Oh, and another thing I wanted to say about my fabric, as you can see, I have this kind of like Forest Friends print, and I'll take this off so you can see, but the print does not go both ways. So I'm always making sure that my print is facing the correct way, so I can make sure it's going where the letters, I can read it, that's in the same direction, and then we'll be good with the creatures facing the correct way. All right, so I think I have all of my pieces cut, and tonight we are going to have 3 different camera views. We've got the camera view that you saw of all the cutting and pinning that'll take place on the cutting mat, and Monty will probably be in that camera. And we've also have the sewing machine view here, so you can see what I'm sewing. I am not going to be worrying about finishing my seams tonight. I'm going to recommend, I do have my serger here, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to pinking shear my edges to finish them. You can finish them off any way you want. I'm going to use my pinking shears so they don't run as much. But you can use your serger, or you can use any other method of finishing that you want. So I'm going to go back to the overhead camera and let's take a look at the instructions. So, oops, I skipped a page. The very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pin the center front panel to front top right sides together. Okay, So basically I need to find all the pieces that say front on it. So here we go. We've got a front hemband, we've got a center front panel, and we've got a front top that's been unpinned. Everything else is gonna go to the side. I am going to keep my pattern pieces nearby because we are gonna have to mark something, but I'm opening up the center front top, or the yoke, I like to call it, and other people call it that sometimes, and then the center front panel. These are the two pieces that are going to get sewn together. With any luck, they will be the same width. Let's see. Ooh, pretty close. Great. I'm gonna bring this up so you can see a bit more. So there's the front of the shirt minus the hemband. We need to put these right sides together and pin and sew this edge. So you can see there's a crease in my fabric. I'm gonna line up the creases and pin there first, pin the end. And if they don't line up, just scooch everything so it lines up. And let's see. There we go. You don't have to go nuts with the pins. I'm doing like every 3 or 4 inches. So that's going to be sewing the center front panel to the top. We'll go over to the sewing machine camera, wake it up a little. And now if you saw in the instructions, they're calling for a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which translates to about 3/8 of an inch. I'm gonna do slightly bigger. I'm gonna do a 1/2 inch, just because I feel like 3/8 is a little small. It's not gonna make a huge difference in the size of this shirt, so you can do that too if you would like. All right, let's see here. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning. And don't run over your pins. Sewing along with me and I'm going faster than you, the beauty of this is that you can go back and watch it again. You can pause it. You can go at the pace that you want to go. Okay, so there's that. And there's my front panel. Now we're going to do the same thing with the 2 back pieces, the top back and the center back. So I'm going to grab those and let's see, center back panel 1 and back top or back yoke right there. Okay. So same thing, only they're 2 separate left and right pieces. So I'm gonna split those up and you can see the tops and the bottoms. There's 1, there's 2, and you guessed it, this time I'll fold down the top and pin it. I think I can get away with 3 pins here, and I'll get this one ready as well. head over to the sewing machine. And same seam allowance, 1/2 inch. I'm using the edge of the foot with the edge of the fabric. And then same with the other one. Okay. So now we're going to so it's saying to top stitch the seams here. Okay, so we're gonna press that. I'm just gonna finger press it so I get my seam allowance to go down. Okay, so that's the top of the shirt. That's where the head hole is. And we want the seam allowance, this guy, to go down, and we're gonna top stitch that. And that's it. That's in itself is a way of finishing the seam. So if we top stitch like this, you can just iron it, or you could pin it like me. If you top stitch like this, it'll be more finished than it would be if you don't. So you don't have to worry about fraying as much. So I'm gonna get all 3 pieces set, and like I said, the only reason I'm not ironing is just because I don't have the setup for the live stream. But if you've got your stuff set up and you've got your iron, this would be a great time to just press it and then make sure that seam allowance is facing down. And then I gotta find the one I did. Here it is. Pressing it would also be good to get this giant crease out, but I will do that later, I promise. Pressing the seam allowance down and pinning it so it stays in place. I'm using gray thread just because I realized that I have a lot of gray thread and not as much white thread. I feel like we go through white and black and white thread, or at least I do, way quicker than any other colors. So I'm using gray thread, which I think will look nice top stitched on here. This is a lot of gray in it, and it kind of will stand out a little bit on this mint green. Okay. Oops. We will go over to the sewing machine camera. Now, when I top stitch, I don't want the seam allowance to be as big. So on my sewing machine, I have this little foot that has like a little ski. And so when I top stitch, I want to be closer to the seam. So I'm going to use this little ski as my guide and have it ride right on. The ski is going to ride right on this seam from before. So I'm not stitching in the ditch, I'm stitching just below that seam. Snip that. Back you guys up a little bit. Alright, and then I'm going to go straight into the back. Just to save time, and then I'll snip this. back piece. Snip that apart again. Too hard on yourself if your top stitch, you know, is not perfectly straight. It takes some practice. All right, so now I've got, bring that up a little so you can see better. My two, let's do my front facing up, and then my two backs will go here to line up the shoulder seam. All right, so shoulder seam here, lining up pretty well. I'm gonna grab some pins and pin that together. And then same on this side. So we are on step, well, it's labeled step 2. There's a lot of steps, but it's right here where it says shoulders, and we're pinning the shoulders just like that little diagram. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. 1/2 inch seam allowance on this, and then we've got a funky little side seam. So if you don't have a ruler handy after this step, grab a ruler. Even a really tiny ruler will be fine. Okay, shoulder seams. Jump right into the second shoulder seam so I can just line it right up here, lift my presser foot and start. And then we're connected back here. I'll just snip them. But these, when I do that one right after another, it's a great way to just not have a bunch of threads hanging off your project. So let me back up here. Okay, shoulder seam is finished. Now, once you're laying it down again, I want you to line up the side really well. And this is where you're going to need to grab your pattern piece. There's going to be a notch. And I think it's going to be on, it's going to be on the center back panel. So have it facing up with the back wrong side facing up. There's a notch right here. Find the notch that applies to your size and pin it. Pin the two fabrics right where the notch is. Now, so this is going to be your armhole, but it wants us to, and this is where we will pay close attention to the instructions. It wants us, and it's a little confusing, and hopefully my demonstration will help, but it wants you to put a line on here that's 1 centimeter above your notch. So I'm just gonna find my ruler. It doesn't have centimeters on it. Where'd my little tiny ruler go? Here it is. Okay. So because we wanted to do a 1 centimeter seam allowance, we know 1 centimeter is about 3/8 of an inch. So since my ruler doesn't have centimeters on it, I'm going to go with just shy of a 1/2 inch above. Can you all see that? So there's my notch pin, and I'm going to draw a line right there above it, and then I'm going to draw a 1 centimeter line there. So this is where we're going to sew along here, and then actually I'm going to make it come in a little bit since we're doing a tiny bit larger of a seam allowance. I'm going to sew across to here, turn the corner, and go down the side, okay? But before I do that, I'm going to add some pins, just a couple, to make sure the sides are lined up. All right, there's that. I do need to find the notch on this side. Now, the tricky part about finding the notch on this side is the pattern is flipped. So, my recommendation to you is to make a snip in the pattern where your notch is. Put that up against the side, and remember, we're just pinning where the notch is, so it's right there. And then we're drawing the line 1 centimeter roughly above. As long as it's consistent with the other side, I'm happy. So same thing. So I'm going to sew in and then down the edge. And then this gets left open for your sleeves. Okay, so once again, pin, pin, and pin. All right, sewing the sides. Here we go. So in case you didn't get what I meant, here is the side I'm going to sew down, but I'm going to start it this way so that I can sew along that line, and I'll back stitch the whole thing, do it again, and stop in the corner. And I'm going to leave my presser foot in the fabric. Can you see? And lift my presser foot up so I can turn and I don't move it, and then keep going. There we go. All right, back that up. So same thing on the other side, only we're going to do it backwards because I don't want to start there. It's going to be very awkward. So I'm going to start at the bottom and go up to where I have my little notch. So 1/2 inch seam allowance. To where my little line is, stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot up, pivot your fabric, and sew to the end. But then stop, back stitch the whole thing, and sew off. And now we've got our little sleeve holes. So if we get a little closer, oops, show you, got cords falling here. There we go. I want to show you because I'm going to notch into the corner here. We've got a horizontal line and a vertical line, and I'm going to cut a diagonal notch into there, making sure not to cut the seam. And then I'm going to turn this and do the same thing over here. So I cut a diagonal into that notch. And now we've created our little sleeve places. So backing things up again. Here's our entire thing. I'm going to go back to the instructions and see where we are. So I just did the clip, and now I'm going to sew the sleeve bands. So fold the sleeve bands in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, and press. This is done. So these are the ones that were cut on the diagonal, and we're gonna fold them in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, which looks like, let's get this all out of the way. Sleeve band, sleeve band. Folding in half, wrong sides together, and create a crease, okay? You can do that with the iron, or you can just do that by finger pressing like I am. We're doing this just to create this crease. I'm gonna do the same thing with the other one, because as soon as we're done creasing it, we're gonna open it back up. And this is just gonna make a step later on a little easier. So if you've got the iron handy, go ahead and press it. Otherwise, you can do what I'm doing and finger press. Okay, now we're gonna unfold it and put right sides together. See, I've still got the crease there, but I'm gonna sew this short side on one armband or sleeve band, and on two sleeve bands. So here we go. Okay, let's sew these. Same 1/2 inch seam allowance. Second one. Oops. Sometimes you can get caught. There we go. All right, so here's where the previous, let's open up the seam that you just sewed, flatten it like that. And now put wrong sides together and use that same crease all the way around. Now, this is something that I find makes our next step a little easier. I'm going to pin just a couple pins, and I'm going to baste this raw edge of just the sleeve band first. And then we're going to pin it to the shirt. I like to baste this first because it just prevents things going haywire when you sew them to the shirt. This way you know the edges of this are sewn together and we don't miss anything when we sew it to the shirt. So same goes for this one. Open up. There we go. The seam allowance, put those together. Pin. Pin. always good. All right, so like I said, let's baste that. You can do it by removing your free arm. I'll probably just leave it off now. And snip my thread and put the sleeve band right on here. And I'm going to do a really small seam allowance because I don't want to see the stitching when I sew it onto the sleeve in the next step. And since this is basting, you can actually turn up your stitch length really high if you want. Maybe I'll turn down a little bit. Just saves time. Snip, snip. Okay, now my edges are together. Get my other one. So I'm curious who's sewing along with me. I think my sister-in-law is here sewing along with me. And she's Catherine, you're a pretty fast sewer. I'm curious if you're keeping up with the speed of the video. I bet she is. She's pretty fast. All right. I will stop talking and showing you my sewing machine. Maybe we'll hear from her. All right, I've got my little bands and I've got my shirt and I'm gonna turn it right side out. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit with my camera. And the bands are hopefully going to fit very nicely along these little sleeve holes. So I've got the seam here and I'm going to match the seam up with my little seam down here and I'm going to pin. And I'm going to go all the way around. And I'm just going to kind of lay it over it and try to stretch it and get it to kind of fit. Oh, look at that. It's fitting beautifully. So when I do stuff like this, I like to pin on the top and then kind of stretch and make sure we get a couple pins on this side. Somehow I measured that correctly. And it fits on there nicely. Hopefully that is happening with yours as well. If not, you can always kind of ease it a little bit. So I'm pinned, and don't forget, this is the raw edge of the sleeve hole on the shirt matched up with the raw edge of the band. So we've got one on this side, and then flip it, and we've got one on this side. Oh. Oh, she melted fabric. That's the worst. Hopefully you can get it off your iron. There's a cleaner that you can use, but you can also just kind of like scrape it on something. That's what I tend to do. So Patty's asking if we could make the front button and the back solid. Well, that brings us to an interesting adjustment that I'm going to make on mine. And I'm going to actually sew I'm going to sew the back together. I'm going to do it as if there's a button placket on the back. But I am eventually just going to sew it together, leaving the top slightly open. If I'll show you guys how to, actually I have an example here where I did that. So maybe I will put a buttonhole or two in for those that want to do the buttonhole. But to answer your question, Patty, you can't, because there's not enough fabric in the front to do a placket. You would need more fabric to be able to overlap. The back is created to have that extra fabric. The front is not, although it would be really cute. That being said, one adjustment you can make if you wanted the buttons in the front is to just change the neckline. So you couldn't just like wear it, you know, backwards, because the neckline was going to be too high. But if when you're cutting it, you adjusted the neckline to maybe go a little bit lower, you could wear it backwards. So that might be a solution for you, to have the buttons in the front. But here we go. Finish pinning that. I've got a bunch of pins over here. All right. Pin. Okay, so keep in mind I basted the sleeve bands so you can see stitching on here. Now when I go to sew the armbands of the sleeve, I'm going to do it in a circle like I did, but I'm going to do it a larger seam allowance so then I won't see my basting stitches when I flip it right side out. Okay, let's go back to the sewing machine. I feel like every time I go back to the sewing machine I have to wake up my phone, which is the camera that is on my sewing machine. So let's see if we can get that to... No, what's happening? Hold on. Hold on. Come on, sewing machine cam. There it is. Okay. So, it doesn't matter where you start, but use your free arm. Take it off of the basting stitch, if you were basting, and make sure your seam allowance is larger than it was when you basted. I didn't backstitch at the beginning because I'm just going to go in a circle and I'll backstitch when I come back to where I started. Now, when you're doing something like this where maybe it doesn't fit perfectly, you can, like I said before, kind of stretch it a little bit, and that will make everything fit together. So I'm kind of stretching as I go around. If you end up with some puckers, don't even worry about it. Nobody will notice but you. I promise. Alright, once you come close to where you started, just kind of eye the stitching so you can line it up again with it. Snip. And same thing on the other side. Maybe I should move that. Ouch. Things are getting a little weird because I ran out out of bobbin, or I'm about to run out of bobbin. That's okay because I've got another one spun right here. Okay, so yay, little sleevelets are on. So I'm gonna turn it so the front is facing out, and I'm gonna flip. Now this is where you might wanna do a little bit of pinking shears. Flip that out, and then flip that out, and look at that, not too bad. Keep in mind I'm not pressing yet, but it looks pretty good. There and there. Oh, Ellen, that used to work at the studio, is on. Hi, Ellen. It's good to see you and have you drop in on this little class. We're making a top. It's looking like a top. Let's see. So I do want to consult back to the directions. I have a bad habit of just not reading instructions, especially when I'm teaching a class and you're all looking at instructions. So let me look. Okay, so this is where it's telling us to apply the fusing to the facings. And as I said, I'm not going to put the fusing on because I just don't think it needs it with my fabric. It's just this light quilter's cotton that I don't want to have a ton of structure in the shirt. So I did one before, didn't have any of the interfacing, and it turned out great. So clear this out of the way. Now these are the pieces that were kind of weird looking. So it's the back facing and the front facing, and these pieces are the ones that are going to go together. So I'm going to unpin, and it was cut on the fold, so it's kind of like a half circle. And then this one is two separate pieces that's going to get sewn to create almost a full circle, like that and like that. And this is what's going to go around the neck edge. Okay, we're going to attach here and attach here, but we need to have right sides together. So flip it, line up this short edge. I don't want to do one pin, I think I want two. And same thing, flip it over so right sides are together. And we're going to sew this, and this is going to mimic the edge of the shirt, right? So you've got this kind of circular head hole, and then this is the head hole that's going to get sewn to it to finish off the neckline. Okay? So let's sew this, and zoom in a little bit here. And then, let's see. This one's getting sewn as well, so I'm just going to put it right up against it. I'm going to sew off the first one. Oops. Put up my presser foot and just continue. But I have to backstitch because I'm sewing something new. For anybody who doesn't quite sure what's happening here, it's basically Just lining up these two things that I have to sew, and then you just snip them apart. Okay? So now we've got those. We'll go back and this is going to get pinned to this. Now, keep in mind, we haven't done anything with our hemband yet. Hemband, gets sewn on later. Just double checking. Yep. We're sewing the facing to the shirt. Find the back of the facing. We've got creases, so we can match up creases. And right sides together, start pinning around. So I'll pin the center. And then you'll see this nice corner. The corner should match, so I'm going to pin that next. And then seam to seam, that should match up pretty nicely. So I'll pin that. Stick one in between here. Don't be afraid to pin as much as you need on this step. And really like scooch your edges so they line up. So same thing on this side. Find that corner, the 90-degree angle. They match up. And pin the seam at the shoulders together. And then you pin down this back here. That's going to be the back of the shirt where the button placket is, okay? Now, currently, this edge of the facing is still a raw edge. After I sew this on, I'm going to hem it because I want that to be finished on the inside. But first we'll sew it to the shirt. And almost goes down to the bottom. I'm a little off, but that's okay. All right, so that's gonna get sewn. So in case you're wondering where it says to hem this facing, it's basically just saying neaten the lower edge of the facing, and you could serge it if you wanted to. I'm going to fold it over and hem it after it's already attached. All right, let's sew it. I'm gonna start at the bottom, my uneven bottom, but we'll make sure we fix that later. Before you get to it, put your needle down, pivot, and keep going. Now, here's where it's gonna get rounded, okay? So make sure, like, I'll show you this mess. Make sure you're kind of allowing what you're sewing to be flat and to be curved. Okay. Take your time. Sew around the curve and just keep adjusting as you go. And when you adjust, make sure your needle's in the fabric so nothing moves. Now, since this is very curved, before we turn the facing to the inside, we're going to clip around the edges. Or we're going to clip the seam allowance. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, we got to the corner, needle down, pivot, and keep going. It off. Now, before I go and turn anything inside out, I'm just going to do a quick hem. I'm not even going to press it. I'm actually going to start at the other side. So this is the edge that I'm going to hem. So I'm just going to do it kind of as I go. I'm not going to pin it or iron it. I'm just going to basically fold about 1/2 inch, and as I go I just get more folded. I stop, I adjust, I get more folded, and I keep going. So this is just like the quick, easy way to hem something. You know, don't overthink it. It's not a big deal. It's all going to wind up on the inside. It's good practice just to kind of practice hemming without pinning or pressing. It's just like a fast thing to do. And I encourage you to try it because, again, if you make a mistake, it doesn't really matter. It gets a little trickier as we get curved. So I'm just doing a little less at a time. But it's still working. Kind of like holding it, sewing, stopping. I promise you, as crazy as it looks on this side, it's going to look great on that side. All right, almost around. So just try to be really diligent about not folding too much in, because that's when it starts to get wonky. So it's the same amount. Just do a little at a time. Stretch here. I'm going to put my needle in, get a bunch in front of me. Oh, I still have to get around this corner. Hold on. I don't know if you can hear Antonio breathing very heavily. He seems to want to be close by. He says hello. Okay, I'm straight edge again. Pull it off. Let's make some sense of this pile of fabric. Got our little facing, and yes, this is where pressing is going to come in really handy, so I encourage you all to do it. I'm just finger pressing, and I'm going to pin the facing in. Okay, pin. Remember these corners? You could clip off the corner if you want. Make that nice and pointy. And pin it. Alright, so now this is the back, and it's our like straight little piece. I'm just gonna pin, and I'm pinning like kind of far from the edge because I'm gonna top stitch the edge, and then this way I can keep the pins in there where they are, because I'm gonna be top stitching along here and along this top outer edge. So my pins will be plenty out of the way. Okay. And then move around to the other side. Flip the corners. So you have a nice sharp corner. And get this side to fold in. And this straight edge here, that's going to be your button placket where it buttons in the back. And let's see. There we go. Go. I think it all fits in there now. Some more pins. All right. So here's where we're going to top stitch. Let me just show you what it's looking like. There's the neck edge. Pull out the other sleeve. And then if you flip, you can see the back is all now a clean edge as well. And this is what I was talking about by having more fabric where the buttons are going to be. Because you're going to have this, it's basically the facing overlaps so you can have the buttons down the back. Okay? So, gonna top stitch, and then we're gonna work on the hem band. Find my hem bands. There they are. All right, got my hem bands ready to go. You should as well. Let's do it. Let me wake up the sewing machine camera again. There we go. And we'll start over here on the bottom. And this is an edge stitch or a top stitch. And it's pretty wide. So what I did on the other one is I top stitched it twice. So I did one about a 1/2 inch from the edge, and then I'm gonna do a second top stitch just to make this lay a little bit easier. I'll do a second one a 1/2 inch from that stitch line. So I'm gonna do it twice. I hate it when a facing like pops out of your shirt. So that's why I do that. Time. I can leave my pins right where they are. They're not going to be in the way, but like I said, just so this facing doesn't pop out later, I'm going to keep the edge of the foot along the edge of the first row of stitching. Pivot. So I'm kind of letting the fabric lay in the way it's supposed to. Rather than like sewing it like this, I'm letting it be in the shape it wants to. And then that way it'll be flatter when you sew it and you won't have little bunches. Does, you know, this function to keep the facing in, it kind of looks nice having this double rows of top stitching. Okie dokie. All right, I'm going to keep all those pins in there for now. I'm not going to worry about it. So it is looking like a shirt, ladies and gentlemen. So now we've got to get the hemband, and I do want to refer to the instructions just so if you're following along, you can do the same. All right, so aligning pin the front hemband to the back hembands, aligning notches, right sides together. So basically get your back hembands and your front hembands. So this is the front, and it's on a fold like everything on the front with this pattern. Unfold it, right? And then take your back hemband pieces. Make sure if you're doing a print, they're all facing the same way. So we're going to sew this together. So first I'll pin it. And then pin this side. Okay, so I'm going to sew the 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side. So these are open. And then a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side. Okay. Go find my other side. Keep my pins facing up. Okay. Moving right along. So this is where we're going to fold it in half lengthwise, right sides together, and we're going to sew here. So I'll pin it, and then same on the other side. Just want to double check something. Did I mess up? I don't think I did, but anywho, side, we'll always make it work. That I promise you. Just want to see. Just like, yeah, okay, that's gonna be fine. Just like, it's a weird picture because this is going to get attached to the bottom, and then the reason it's right sides together is because we're going to flip that, then sew it on. So let's sew this, and then it'll all come together. Okay. Oh, I can get my other one. All right. So I've got a shirt. I can bring that up just a little bit so you can see some more. And I've got the bottom of the shirt. Now, my middle piece is a little longer. So before I put the hemband on, I'm going to even this out. And that's an easy enough thing to do since it's consistently bigger. I can just cut it and that will even it out. Then I take my hemband and turn what I just sewed right side out. You could press it so it's nice and flat. Turn the other side right side out. Now, since my print is only going one way, I have to make sure that, yeah, there we go. It's going the right way. Because I'm going to attach this. And it should, with any luck, be the same length. It's pretty darn close on mine. So this we definitely have to pin. And if you want to baste this edge together first before you sew it to here, you can. I'm not going to. I'm just going to put them right sides together, lining this up with the beginning over here. And I'm going to use a lot of pins. And I'm going to make sure that these really important spots are getting lined up. So I have a seam here and I have a seam here. I'm going to pin that. And I have a little bit of extra. So when I sew it, I'm just going to stretch it a tiny bit so that the extra goes away. The fabric has enough give that we can make that work. Same goes for over here. Seam gets pinned to seam. Go to the end. That side looks pretty good. Pin that. Might have to do a little bit of easing. Looks pretty good. And then just see, you can see where the creases are in the fabric, and those are lining up in the middle. That is like a good, pretty good fit. It's all working out. And I always double check because now it's like, now I'm doubting myself. So when I flip this, I want to make sure that my animals are still going the right direction, and they are, so I can sew it. So we'll sew this hemband on, and then I will attempt to do some buttonholes for you. I actually really like doing buttonholes on this machine, but it's the first machine I've ever owned that buttonholes aren't like, just a big mess. I say that now, and then watch what'll happen. Okay, so again, I'm going to stretch the fabric just a tiny bit as I sew. To the overhead, flip that down, and I want to top stitch this so it'll flatten it out. You can press it, I'm gonna finger press it, but I'm gonna pin it so that my seam allowance is underneath the seam, okay? So I'm going to feel up under and make sure that my seam allowance is down, facing down. And I would do that if I were pressing it. I would just feel underneath, make sure it's coming down. It's a good rule of thumb that your seam allowances will go down. Head towards the bottom of the garment when they're, when they lay either up or down. Left or right, that can change, I guess, but when in doubt, just make them go down. Okay, so top stitch that, and then we've got buttonholes. So here. So I want to line up. I want to get kind of close. There we go. To the seam. Can you see that? Here's the seam here, and I'm using the presser foot. The top part of the presser foot here is riding right up against the seam. And by top stitching this, it kind of makes it lay a little nicer. Stretch here. No more machine sewing. Just some, oh no, just kidding. I'm going to do the buttonholes on the machine. Alright, I'm going to take these pins out of my little placket. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it together in the back and kind of determine where I want my pins to be, my buttons to be. I suggest the least amount of buttons that you can get away with, just because putting buttons in can be difficult. And this is the kind of shirt that it's in the back. So doing less pins, I think is going to be, less buttons is going to be okay. Like if this was your front, you wouldn't want 4 buttons because they'd be popping open because it's on your chest. But your back is pretty flat. So probably isn't going to pop open and reveal something it shouldn't. So that being said, let's see. If I start at the top, you definitely want one at the top, right? So I think I'll put one right here. And then this is an 18-inch ruler. 6, 12, 18. Yeah, I might just do that. So every 6 inches from my first one, which puts one here. and I'm just pinning through the top layer, and it doesn't matter which way you go. Like if you have a real preference as to what way you'd like it to go on you, then you can kind of think about that, but I'm just going to do it like this. 6 inches below that is here. 6 inches below that is right here. So that'll give me 4 buttons on this entire back. I don't honestly know what they recommend. Let's see. They've got 5 buttons. I'm okay with doing 4. So when you're putting the buttonholes on, you don't have to worry so much about like where they wind up being exact, because you can always sew the buttons to make sure, like if you somehow miscalculate the distance between, it doesn't really matter. You're going to sew the buttons according to where the buttonholes are. But I like to pin my buttonholes like this, and I'm going to use the space in between the top stitching as my little area to make my buttonhole fall in between. So I'm actually going to turn this upside down when I'm on the sewing machine, and I'm going to start here. Let me go to the sewing machine so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit closer. Okay, so this is the top of the back, and you can see maybe there's the 2 rows of top stitching and then my button. Every time you do a buttonhole, it's going to start at the top of the buttonhole and move back. So I'm always going to start where my pin is, and I'm always going to start in between the 2 rows of top stitching. Now I have to change my foot, so I have to get my buttonhole foot. So now every buttonhole, every sewing machine does a buttonhole differently. So you're going to have to look at your manual or look on YouTube to see if you're not sure how to do a button. So I'm just going to do it the way I do, you know, I use the buttonhole foot on my machine. And I go over here, I select buttonhole, I can change the size with these arrows. I'll be honest, I'm just going to do the default size, and then I will find buttons that fit. So I slide it under. I'm gonna start, lower my presser foot where my pin is, and then I'm gonna take my pin out and I'm gonna give it a whirl. Let's see if this works. Now you can stop in the middle if you want. I'm just, because I've got this long thread, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, now I'm gonna stop so I can cut that. And mine stops automatically. I'm supposed to cut it. It's not working. That's okay. So there's my first buttonhole. Same thing goes for where the next pin is. Lower it where the pin is, and that's where it's going to start. Second buttonhole, not as good. There's something weird going on with the thread because my thread cutter's not working. I think this would be better. Third buttonhole. Oops. It's wanting to cut the thread every single time. So that's annoying. I have a thread cutter on my machine that for some reason is not working correctly right now. So then every time I start, it wants me, there we go, to clear some thread out. Oof, and I just took my pin out, didn't I? Oh, I know where it is. There's a little thread there. That's a huge thing with the buttonhole foot, is if you don't know if it's going to start over, one of the tricks that I will do is I'll turn my machine off and just start from scratch, because if I don't know where in like the sequence of the buttonhole, some machines it's hard to tell. You can turn it off, turn it back on, start your buttonhole again. All right, one more buttonhole. Ugh, okay. I guess I need to deal with that cutting problem, but another time. Okay. I've got my 4 buttonholes. Now, I'll just show you. I am not going to hand sew my buttons tonight. But I do want to show you cutting a buttonhole. You can use your scissors. So you can take the buttonhole, get a little bit closer here, and you can kind of fold it and snip. And if you've got scissors that have a nice sharp tip, you can just use scissors. If you prefer, you can use a seam ripper. And if I use the seam ripper method, I will pin at the beginning and the end so I don't go too far with my seam ripping. Need a nice sharp seam ripper. Put the tip of it in, cut, and then the pin prevents you from going too far. There's another buttonhole. And another buttonhole. So if you have a large collection of buttons at home, like I do, you just go through and find 4 buttons that fit in your buttonholes. And then those are what's going to get sewn up. And I have this thing when I sew buttons on stuff, the buttons never match because I have this thing where, you know, they're all just kind of mismatched buttons. So they'll all be the same size, but they'll definitely be different colors. Unless it's something that I really care about and for some reason don't want to have different colored buttons, but most of the time they're all different colors. All right, folks, this about winds up our boxy top workshop. That's the back. Oh, let me back this up. There we go. There's the back. Ooh, there's the front. I've still got pins in mine. Take your pins out before you wear it, and there it is, my friends. Mine looks kind of like a pajama top. but I'm okay with that. Hope you all learned something this evening. Hope you'll join me again. I have another live stream sewing workshop coming up on Sunday, actually. These are really close together because I had to postpone this one. So on Sunday, we will be doing another top, the Paddington top from Peppermint magazine. Puffy sleeve, love it. Another button in the back, I think, though, but it's got some really cool puffy sleeves. Hopefully you can join me for that. Hope you had a nice time following along, even if you're not sewing. I appreciate you being there, and if you're watching the recording, hopefully you've just made a shirt. Good night.